welcome to Crimes Through Time, your weekly snapshot of crime history. Louisa Masset gave birth to Manfred, her illegitimate son, in 1896. The scandal caused her to leave her native France and settle in London. She was not the maternal type from the beginning and entrusted the care of her son to a foster mother. When he was 3 years old, Louisa fell in lust with a younger man, and Manfred became an inconvenience. His little body was found battered and suffocated in a toilet stall in a railway station. It didn't take long for it to be clear that Louisa was responsible, and she was subsequently tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. Let's explore the murder of Manfred Masset by his mother Louisa that made her the first person in Britain to be hanged in the 20th century. Louisa Josephine Jemima Masset was 33 years old when she found herself pregnant out of wedlock. She gave birth to Manfred Louis Masset on the 24th of April 1896. This was quite the scandal, and the stigma caused by the situation meant that it was impossible for Louisa to get work. She decided to move to live with her sister Leonie Caddish and her husband Richard at 29 Bethune Road, Stoke Newington. Louisa's mother was English and her father French, so she was fluent in both languages. She was sophisticated and well educated, leading her to gain employment as a day governess as well as teaching piano. This left one problem: who would care for Manfred? Louisa placed an advertisement in a newspaper requesting a foster mother for Manfred. Helen Gentle answered, and in May 1896, Helen took the baby to live with her and her mother Mrs. Norris in 210 Clyde Road, Tottenham. She was to be paid 37 shillings a month. This money was thought to have come from Manfred's father, who still lived in France. Manfred and Helen would receive fortnightly visits from Louisa, which increased to weekly on a Wednesday as he grew older. She would take him for walks, and the pair would often visit Tottenham Green. This arrangement would continue until October 1899. On the 16th of October 1899, Mrs. Norris received a letter from Louisa. It stated that Manfred's father wished him to be returned to France to begin his education there. Louisa had agreed for Manfred to move to France and requested that he be ready for her to take custody of him on the 27th of October. Louisa made her usual Wednesday visit on the 25th, and final arrangements were made for the handover. As agreed, Helen and Manfred met Louisa outside the Birdcage public house on Stamford Hill at 12:45 p.m. Helen watched the two board the omnibus on the way to London Bridge Station, where they were to take the train to Newhaven to board the ferry over to France. This would be the last time Helen would see Manfred alive. In the evening of Friday the 27th of October, Mary Tian and her friend Margaret Biggs were at Dalston Junction station en route to a lecture when nature called. When she entered the lavatory, it was clear that something or someone was blocking the stall. She first assumed in the darkness it was a woman in distress and went to fetch help. She asked for help from a porter who raised the alarm. The station inspector, David Bundy, grabbed a lamp and went to investigate. What he found was the body of a small boy, wrapped in just a black shawl. His head pointed out of the stall and his feet towards the toilet. His head and face were covered in blood, and next to him lay a broken clinker brick, a type of ornate paving stone. He immediately called for a doctor and the police. Dr. James Patrick Fennell attended the scene at around 6:55 p.m, about half an hour after the body had been discovered. He pronounced life extinct. It was clear that the murder had happened very recently, and this was confirmed at the post-mortem to be around 3:55 p.m. to 4:55 p.m. Nothing was found with the little man to initially identify him, so the police relied on the newspapers to distribute the details, including a full description of him. This was published on Monday the 30th of October. Helen saw the reports and came forward to the police, concerned for the boy she had loved and looked after since just after he was born. She was taken to the mortuary, where she was able to positively identify Manfred Masset. The police headed straight to 29 Bethune Road. Louisa was not there, but her sister and brother-in-law were. They confirmed to the police that Louisa had told them too of the plan for Manfred to return to France. She had left the house at around 12:30 p.m. on the 27th and not returned until 9 p.m. on the 29th. Louisa was currently at the home of a student who she taught French and piano. They didn't know when she would return. The police were sceptical, so once they said their goodbyes, they waited under cover outside for her return. Around 2 a.m. on Tuesday morning, a man arrived at the home. He stayed only a short while and then Mr. Caddish had left with him. The police followed. The man turned out to be George Richard Symes, another of Louisa's brother-in-laws, and when he knocked on the door, they found a very upset Louisa. She had arrived around 11 p.m, very distressed after seeing that the murdered boy found at the station had been identified as Manfred and that she was wanted in connection with his death. Louisa confirmed that the story of Manfred returning to France was false and that she had spent the weekend in Brighton with her lover and next-door neighbour, Eldor Lucas. She had given custody to 2 women along with £12 in order for him to be educated at their new school. She claimed that when she and Manfred were on one of their Wednesday visits to Tottenham Green on October the 4th, she had made the acquaintance of 2 sisters named Browning, the younger of which daughter Millie was playing in the park with Manfred. The sisters talked of their desire to start a day school for children in Chelsea. Louisa remarked that she would be interested in a place for her son, stating that she was worried his education would be inadequate where he was. They assured Louisa a place could be found for the price of £12 a year for board and lodgings and 10 shillings a month for education. The ladies all met up again the following Wednesday, the 11th, and further discussions were had. They all agreed to meet at London Bridge railway station at 2 p.m. on the 27th of October, where the money and Manfred would be handed over. This might seem very far-fetched through the modern lens, but this was in the time of baby farmers. The sisters, posing as educators, would very skillfully convince naive women like Louisa to hand over their children and to send a recurring amount of money. The child would then be sold on for adoption or, in the worst case, killed. The farmer would then continue to collect the money. However, it is unlikely a criminal would carry out such a public murder. Most children who met that fate were found washed up by the River Thames. Louisa, not wanting to hurt Helen's feelings, had made up the story about Manfred travelling to France. Knowing she would need to stay away from home for a time to make the story believable, she took the opportunity to have some alone time with Eldor. The police didn't believe her and she was arrested and charged with murder. The trial opened at the Old Bailey on the 13th of December. Mr. Justice Bruce presided. Charles Matthews and Richard Muir acted for the prosecution, and Lord Coleridge and Arthur Hutton defended Louisa. The movements of Louisa and Manfred up until 3 p.m. are agreed by both sides. The pair boarded the omnibus at the Birdcage and headed to London Bridge Station. Georgina Worsley, an attendant at the waiting room at the station, saw them at 1:42 p.m. as they entered the room and testified they stayed until 2:30 p.m. She spoke to Louisa, who said that she was waiting for someone to arrive. At 2:40 p.m, Louisa and Manfred entered the other waiting room at the station and are seen by Ellen Rees. She recalls the pair because the little boy was crying. Ellen inquired about what was wrong, and Louisa said he was missing his nurse and perhaps was hungry. She left saying she was going to buy him a cake. This was 3 p.m. From here is where the accounts differ. Ellen Rees testified she saw Louisa alone at 6:50 p.m. when she asked for a towel to take a wash. Later she asked what time the next train to Brighton was. She was told 7:20 p.m. Ellen saw Louisa leave the waiting room and board the 7:22 p.m. train to Brighton. She even picked her out with certainty at an identity parade. Louisa maintained it was 3:55 p.m. when the 2 Browning sisters appeared and took custody of Manfred. The handover was so quick that she was able to board the 4:07 train to Brighton. Louisa and Eldor were due to stay at Findlay's Hotel on 26 Queen's Road, Brighton. Alice Reel, the chambermaid at the establishment, checked Louisa in at 9:45 p.m. under the name Miss Brooks. and reserved a second room for her brother who would be arriving the following day. This was confirmed by the owner, John Finlay. Of course, it was Eldor that arrived on the Saturday. He arrived by train at 2:30 p.m. and were met by Louisa. 10 minutes later, Alice Skeets, an attendant at the station, would find a brown paper parcel in the ladies' waiting area. It went unclaimed and was sent to London Bridge Station, where the police were alerted. Helen had told the police she had sent Manfred with a brown parcel and toys the day she handed him over to his mum. Inside was a child's jacket and frock with some trimmings. It was shown to Helen and she confirmed them as the clothes Manfred was wearing on the 27th of October. The police even went as far as to compare the brown paper used to the remainder of the paper still at Helen's. The tear marks matched. The couple spent the weekend together, making use of only one room out of the two they booked. When they each checked out on the Sunday, Alice cleaned the room in preparation for the next guest and discovered a toy scales under the bed. Again, Helen was able to identify them as belonging to Manfred. The prosecution then turned its attention to the black shawl that Manfred was discovered wrapped in. Ernest Hopkins Mooney, the manager of McElroy's draper's shop at 121 High Street, Stoke Newington, took to the stand and testified that he had bought 15 of the woolen shawls from his supplier, and only 3 were black. He then produced the other 2 in court, and it was agreed that they were a perfect match to the shawl found with Manfred. Maud Clifford, the sales assistant in the shop, testified she sold the black shawl to Louisa on the 24th of October. The shawls had only been in stock a week, and the customer insisted it had to be black. The evidence seemed overwhelming against Louisa, but one thing the prosecution had trouble proving was motive. What would have driven Louisa to kill Manfred? They proposed it could be to unburden herself of her son, so she could pursue a relationship with Eldor. When he was questioned on the stand, he told of a very new and not particularly serious relationship. They had met in September 1898, but had only been seeing each other for the past 4 to 5 months. Louisa had told him of Manfred, and he seemed unbothered, but did ask that she not talk of him again. The couple didn't talk of marriage at all, as Eldor had only just turned 19 that November, and Louisa was 36. It seems that the couple could have easily continued their relationship with Manfred in the care of Helen. So the prosecution raised the idea that Manfred was a financial burden. Again, this was weak. Louisa stayed at her sister's rent-free, earned well from her job, and Manfred's father sent maintenance covering Helen's fees. Leonie, Louisa's sister, had acted as a guarantor for the 37 shillings should Louisa not pay Helen, but never once had to step in. She had no financial difficulties that anyone could find. Louisa testified in her own defence. She retold the story of the Browning sisters and the school in Chelsea. When challenged about why she hadn't taken Manfred to the school, making sure it was a safe environment for a small boy and helping him settle in, she said that was the original plan, but that the women were late and there was no time before she had to get the Brighton train. Likewise, there was no time to grab a pen and paper for a receipt for the £12 payment. But Louisa didn't need to get that train. Eldor wasn't due for another day. Why the rush to get there on that Friday afternoon? She gave the school's address as 45 Kings Road, Chelsea. This was found to be the address of Henry Willis, a dairyman with no connection to the case and with no knowledge of anyone named Browning. Louisa insisted that she got on the 4:07 p.m. train. She then left a Gladstone bag in the left luggage and took a walk to the seafront. The weather was changeable, so she decided to go for a meal at Mutton's restaurant. She then collected her bag and checked into the hotel. Dr. Fennell and Dr. Thomas Bond gave the medical evidence. Manfred had been suffocated. It appears the brick had been used to stun him before a hand was placed over his nose and mouth. They agreed the most likely time of death was 4:30 p.m. It took less than 30 minutes for the jury to find her guilty. She insisted she was innocent and collapsed in the dock when the words, quote, "hanged by the neck" were said, as the sentence of death were passed against her. Now, it does seem like an open and shut case, but I want to include the evidence that didn't make it into the trial. Let me know in the comments if you think that it would have made a difference to the outcome. It would take 47 minutes to get from the birdcage to London Bridge Station, and Louisa and the witnesses all agree she was there until 3 p.m. Making the assumption she travelled directly to Dalston by catching another omnibus, that means she arrives earliest 3:47 p.m, which fits with the medical testimony. But then we have the return to London Bridge for the Brighton train. If she had gotten on the 4:07 p.m. as she claims, she certainly would be innocent. Henry James Streeter, a waiter at Mutton's restaurant, was working on the 27th of October. The weather was indeed bad and they had only served one man and one woman that day. Both he and Mr. Mutton, the owner, were positive that that woman was Louisa. She arrived at 6 p.m. and stayed for 45 minutes. The men approached a solicitor who contacted the defence team, but they declined to call either man to testify. In fact, they didn't even look into it until after Louisa was sentenced to death. When asked about what she ate at the restaurant, Louisa couldn't recall and made two statements. Neither matched the pot of tea and bread and butter that the female customer enjoyed. The inaccuracy was enough for the men's evidence to be dismissed. A passenger on a bus, David Taylor, came forward and said he saw two women and a young boy on the corner of Bishopsgate Street and Cornhill around 3:45 p.m. The boy seemed upset and fidgety. Another passenger, John Hughes Ellis, was on the bus which stopped at London Bridge Station between 3:15 and 3:30 p.m. Two women and a distressed boy got on and sat opposite him. Now the timing is too early according to Louisa, but John did admit he could have been mistaken about the time. Then a letter arrived at Newgate Prison, addressed to Louisa and dated the 26th of December. It said, quote, "The women of Chelsea must keep out of sight, but they are not anxious to hang you. If the porter at Dalston Junction would speak, he could tell who he saw at 4:45 p.m. there. Anyhow, put this in your lawyer's hands, it may save you." It was not given to the authorities, but it was most likely a hoax. If guilty, Louisa travelled to London Bridge and was seen by witnesses, then travelled unseen to Dalston Junction, committed the crime, wrapped him in a distinctive shawl, then travelled back to London unseen by anyone to let herself be seen by Rees. She then took the train to Brighton and constructed an alibi so it looked like she arrived earlier, only the next day to leave a parcel of clothes at the station with a direct link to her. If innocent, Louisa handed her son over to the Brownings at 4 p.m, who took them to Dalston and committed the crime. The women then parcelled the clothes from the body, with the other clothes in the parcel from Helen that Louisa had given them with Manfred. Then the next day they travelled to Brighton. Louisa admitted that she told them of the destination of the train she was about to catch, hiding the clothes in the waiting area, pocketing the £12. The fact that she couldn't recall her meal at Mutton's is because she didn't know she needed it for an alibi, and she was asked over 2 months after the fact. Let me know in the comments which you think is more likely. A petition was got up by other French women working in London and it was sent to Queen Victoria, but it was ignored. It was reported that she confessed before her execution, saying, quote, "What I'm about to suffer is just." But this could have been a woman who feels guilty for handing her son over to his killers as much as a personal admission of guilt. In the condemned cell, she said calmly, quote, "I can only win peace by meeting my death bravely." Louisa was hanged on the 9th of January 1900 in Newgate Prison by James Billingham and William Warbrick, making her the first person in Britain to be executed in the 20th century. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and let me know what you think of this case in the comments below, and I look forward to welcoming you in the next one.